back to the 70s, do you remember the Mansfield when we had to beat them to go to Division 3?
I remember the Mansfield game very well. I'm just making sure I got the score right. It's 4-3? 4-3?
Or was it 3-2? I can't remember.
3-2.
Yeah.
3-2.
Yeah, and I can remember, I think my old buddy scored the winning goal. I think it was Ronnie Walton, ex-Aldershot. There was a big crowd up there that day, 11,000 plus. It was a good crowd, and the atmosphere was brilliant. And I was standing at the allotment end that day, and the atmosphere down there was absolutely electric. It was really, really good. You know, I really did enjoy that game.
Going back to atmospheres up the U's, do you remember back in the in 1970 when we played the first game in the Football League against Lincoln?
I remember it very well. I've got one or two fond memories of that game against Lincoln City, because I can remember being in the Paul's office when all the programmes came in, and that was Dudley Arliss used to run the Paul's office, and all the programmes were numbered, I think, from 1 upwards, and I think some of the directors got the early ones from about 1 to 10, or 1 to 8, and I'm sure I've got number 9. I'm sure I've got programme number 9, and I've still got it. And I can recall who scored the goals. That was Derek Travis scored for Lincoln. They were 1-0 up, and the first goal we scored in the Football League, Colin Meldrum.
Okay, great. So we've come through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. We're now into the 80s, getting towards the slightly more modern era.
Mm-hmm.
The game seems to have changed a lot. The team and the club seems to have changed an awful lot in the 80s. Obviously later on it was the John Beck era, but what do you remember about the early to mid 80s?
Yeah, I mean, when yeah, let's get it right. When Ron Atkinson left, John Doherty took over the club as a manager, and we still went through the leagues. I think we went through the old 4th division, 3rd division, and John Doherty done a brilliant job, because we actually stayed in the 2nd division for quite a few seasons, and then we also got John Beck. John Beck took over from John Doherty, and we got sort of to the pinnacle of the 2nd division, and we had a playoff against Leicester City, and I think we drew the first game at home 1-1, and I think we got hammered in the replay. I think it was 5-1, and had we have got through it, we perhaps would have been one of the founder members of the Premier League.
So you saw that as the pinnacle of Cambridge United's achievement at that time, did you?
Well, yes. I mean, for the club to come from the Southern League to almost getting into the Premier League was a sort of rags to riches story. It was a brilliant effort with brilliant staff and managers along the way, and some great players.
And of course, at that time we had at least 2 magnificent cup runs.
Yes, we had two good cup runs. One of them was when we took on the likes of Crystal Palace, and Crystal Palace played this at home, only 1-0. There was a very large crowd turned up on the day, and that was, they beat us 1-0. I think that was a miss kick from one of their defenders. Then the other game, what everybody remembers very fondly, I think that was the biggest crowd we've ever played in front of. That was against Arsenal at Highbury, and we narrowly lost 2-1 to Arsenal. Dion Dublin scoring our goal. The thing I always remember that game, towards the last 10 minutes, a lot of Arsenal supporters were were whistling for the referee to blow up for time because they thought they were going to concede a goal. And sadly, they actually nicked the goal. I think that was Adams that scored the winner. But that was a great achievement for Cambridge United. We had a good squad out that day, and you know, just narrowly missed beating the mighty Arsenal. You know.
We were, Terry. Two names to put your way and ask if you know. Ken Shillito.
Yeah, Ken Shillito. He was one of the managers in the early days. Yeah, Ken Shillito, not a very successful manager.
Okay. I'm going to start to put you on the spot a little bit as we get up, a little more up to date. No hassles there. Right, tell us, as we come through the 90s and started to pretty well go into decline after the almosts of the initial Premier League. Late 90s, early 2000s, you obviously stayed with the club, but there were changes happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps a lot of people won't like me saying this, especially when I'm on camera. We had a lot of bad directors and made a lot of bad decisions, and it almost cost the club dearly. And the club was heavily in debt, and it lost most of its players, and they had to somehow they managed to carry on and managed to pay the debts off bit by bit, and they assembled a squad and they just carried on, and it was a very tough time for everybody, not only the players, the fans and the new directors that came in. But I'm glad to say we got over that terrible era in United history, and we are where we are today through just sheer hard work. And also what we have today, and what we have today in place, we've got a tremendous, and I will say this again, we've got a tremendous backing of a set of directors who are willing to put the money where the mouth is. Everybody pulls in the same direction, everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. They've made some very clever decisions, the directors. We've got a superb chairman in Dave Doggett. Good directors, Graham Daniels, John Clark, Jez George, Renford Sargent, John Smith. We've got a brilliant set of directors in place, and we've got a brilliant manager in place and a brilliant assistant manager in place, and I can see us going on to greater things, and that's because they all pull together and they all sing from the same hymn sheet, and they even they've got a really good backup squad. What do a lot of volunteer work, and you know they're just willing to give the time up, and they put so much effort into what they do, and you know, and that's a recipe for success.
Okay, Terry, so we've been talking about the fact that the club has gone from the highlights of almost reaching the initial Premier League to the difficult days, shall we say, of the 90s, when eventually the club into the 2000s fell into the conference itself. Now, there have been interesting times in the conference, but the first couple of years in particular must have been very difficult.
They were very difficult because we had to assemble a club, or assemble a team, shall I say, with next to no money, and I think they had, I think they got Roy Newman, was it, as manager, and he had to assemble a club or assemble a team as best he could, and they did struggle the first couple of years, and then they did have one or two managers after that. And Roy eventually, his services were no longer needed, and they got varying managers after that, and they had all varying success. first and foremost, I think let's get it in the right order. They got, yes, I think I've got it right way round. They got Jimmy Quinn in. And Jimmy Quinn took us to the pinnacle of trying to get into the Football League. We had a playoff against Exeter, which sadly we lost. And then Jimmy wasn't kept on. Then we had a bit of an unusual situation with, I would just put it that in that terminology. We had a very unusual situation with directors, and Jimmy Quinn's work was disbanded, and then we got a new manager in Gary Brabbin. Gary Brabbin was given, what should we say, Gary Brabbin was given a certain amount of money to put a squad together to get United promotion. They finished second again in the conference, and with the money that he'd had at his disposal, one would have thought we would have beaten Torquay. But surprise, surprise, on the day we lost to Torquay. So actually we did lose to both Devon sides, which is unusual, Exeter and Torquay. And then we had a bit of a barren patch after Gary Brabbin moved on to pastures new. And then the job was given to our director of football, Jez George, and Jez done a fantastic job. But Jez said when he took the job on, he wouldn't keep it unreservedly. He didn't want to be United manager unreservedly. He just wanted to be director of football. So he said, "I'll keep the job on as long as you need me." And then he got in touch with his good friend and I suppose an ex-colleague of his, Richard Money, and Richard came on board, and he was like a breath of fresh air, and he done a good job. I mean, first 2 seasons he was building up a team, and then he put a really good team together, assembled a good side, and we've seen now where it's got to. I mean, it's got us back in the Football League.
I think in amongst all that, Martin Ling was
Yes, I did. I do apologise to Martin unreservedly. Because I did think, yes, I forgot about Martin Ling. But he stayed with us for about a season and a bit, and then his services were no longer needed. That's when we got on